Hello, my name is Gurpreet Dhillon, and I'm a professor of information security at the Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. This presentation relates to a 2006 paper that I published in the Information Systems Journal. The title of the paper is Value Focused Assessment of Information System Security Within Organizations. Over the years, we have extended the original work to develop mechanisms for strategically planning for cybersecurity and how information security policies can be formulated and subsequently implemented. At the core of the argument is the need for security objectives. Clearly, any strategic planning activity needs to have security objectives at the heart of the whole exercise. It is interesting to note that on October 10th, 2014, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase publicly announced that US banks required help in managing cybersecurity threats. Clearly, he was indicating that US banks are underprepared as far as dealing with cybersecurity is concerned. The best examples of a strategic planning focus for IS security were witnessed following the 2007 Estonian attacks, Estonian cybersecurity attack, subsequent to which NATO adopted a unified policy for cybersecurity and defense. A matter of fact, in a subsequent year in 2008, the Bucharest Summit, a Cyber Defense Management Authority was created, is commonly referred to as the CDMA. Correspondingly, in the US, the Obama administration created a cyber threat intelligence integration center. This was in 2015. This center has a mandate to analyze all sorts of cyber security threats in a strategic manner. Several international countries that we have worked closely with have also created similar centers and initiatives which allow for a strategic planning focus, particularly with respect to cybersecurity. Clearly, there is no doubt that a strategic approach to cybersecurity should exist. However, such approaches have not been very well defined. Despite numerous calls in the literature and the practitioner community, the problem of establishing controls and defining cybersecurity persists. It's still there. Security management has often emerged from practical experience rather than from research. There's no theoretical understanding as to why certain companies adopt security practices in a certain way, others do not. There's clearly very little work in the area of cybersecurity strategic planning per se. And this is largely because many organizations still tend to adopt security as an afterthought, which means really that they're thinking of security management after an event has taken place. This results in not really proactively considering all the variables that go into any security planning exercise. It is only after the fact that we are essentially plugging the holes. So our strategies, in one sense or the other, are more reactive than proactive. This leads to a couple of problems. First and foremost is that we are never proactively prepared to deal with these problems. And second, from a security development perspective, it introduces what we call development duality, which means that the development of security practices is not in sync with the system development practices, which essentially means that when we are defining how new systems have to be configured, how new systems should come into being, they are not necessarily in sync with what the nature and scope of those controls should be, which kind of integrate into our system development activities, and hence we end up witnessing what we call development duality, which is a security threat in itself. How can organizations adopt a strategic approach to IS security? What should be incorporated in the strategic IS security planning process? These two fundamental questions are what we try and address in this particular paper. Going through an in-depth analysis, we interviewed a large number of people. We understood what their values were, and subsequent to the values, we try and define what their objectives were. And that's really the core of this particular paper. When we discuss this whole notion about strategic objectives and objectives for cybersecurity, it is important to differentiate between two kinds of strategic sets. One is the organizational strategy set, and the second one is the MIS strategy set. Way back in 1978, in a very seminal paper, Bill King wrote about the organizational strategy set and how the information systems strategic planning process converts the organizational strategy set into an MIS strategy set. Essentially, what Bill was talking about back in the day was that the organization strategy set is composed of the mission, the objectives, the strategy, and other strategic attributes that go into resource allocation, into thinking about where a firm should go. Um, and those inputs come in together to the strategic planning process to define the system objective, the objectives for the information technology implementation, the constraints that are there in terms of how a system should function or should not function, the design attributes, the overall strategy of the systems. His argument was really that if there is no sync between the organizational strategy set and the MIS strategy set, there's going to be absolute misalignment between the two sets. And hence these have to be in sync with each other. When there are two organizational and MIS strategy sets that need some clarification and understanding. This work was originally done by Bill King and was published in a 1978 paper in the MIS Quarterly. What Bill argued was that there's an organization strategy set which constitutes of the mission, the objectives, the strategy, and other resources that a company might have for achieving its core business purposes. And then there is a corresponding information system strategy set which has the system objectives, the system constraints, and how the system is going to be designed, and so on and so forth. And he argued that there has to be a proper alignment between the organization strategy set and the MIS strategy set. And this alignment, according to him, should be brought about through a strategic planning process. He calls the MIS strategic planning process. This alignment is very, very important. If you don't have it, then whatever the company is aspiring to do and is not being supported by the technology, so you're going to have a mismatch there. So business alignment with information technology is absolutely critical. When it comes to security, you need a corresponding security strategy set, because right now, as we see it, cybersecurity is integral to any business, any organization, and it's a question of survival of companies. If you don't have good strategy, you don't have a good security strategic set, then you're going to have a problem in terms of operating in the business world. Imagine a company such as Amazon or eBay who have a denial of service attack and they are not able to function because of a security flaw of sorts. The whole company is going to come to a standstill. So the alignment between what an organization wants and how that is being delivered, what the security objectives are, what the constraints are going to be, is absolutely critical today. And hence, there is an increased need for a security strategic planning process, which really goes beyond just creating a security policy, ensuring that it exists and ensuring that it is implemented adequately. It is not just that. Security strategic planning process goes beyond just a formulation of a security policy. It is the whole overall thought process that goes into establishing systems which are secure, which ensure the smooth running of a company. So that aspect is very, very important. And at the core of all this is the security objectives. How do you define them? What those security objectives should be? If you look around, most of the time people come up with a set of security objectives. They just simply sit down, maybe in a closed room, and say, this is what our company needs to do, and here are our security objectives. So hence, we cannot take the learning from one company, one organization, one enterprise to a second enterprise and say, well, because company X had these security objectives, now you should have a similar set of security objectives. That does not work in practice. Hence, what is important is for us to come up with a generic set of security objectives, cybersecurity objectives, which will help us engage in a strategic planning process and link it back to the organization's strategy set, so that the core purpose of an organization sustains itself. It ensures that the company remains in business and is able to provide value to the shareholders. So what we did was, given this background, and this is something that we talk about in our 2006 paper, we set out to ask people who really deal with security on a day-to-day basis and say, what do they value most? There's a technique out in decision sciences literature called value-focused thinking. So, what value focused thinking essentially says is that there's a difference between going into a closed room and coming up with all sort of alternatives that you might have to create a good strategy, and they oppose it to the strategic objectives should really be grounded in the thinking of individuals, or i.e., they call it the values of people. So we have to understand what those values are and then define those objectives. So we set out to interview a large number of people. 100 plus individuals were interviewed over a period of a year and a half, and these allowed us to create objectives, cybersecurity objectives, which we kind of formulated for a more generic presentation to the companies. Here is an example of how this was done. What you see is a representation of a interview transcript where an individual is saying that my present position allows me to access to an abundance of confidential and valuable information, and is often a source of conflict with my own reasoning process, and so on and so forth. So we go through the interview transcript and identify what this individual really values in terms of security. So things like responsible use of information, value-based work ethic, professional ethics, censure. Those are some of the things that strike out of this particular interview. So we kind of capture them. So we did this with 100 odd interviews, and then configured them using this whole technique of value-focused thinking, which is promoted by Ralph Keeney. And once we have these values, so to speak, we start organizing them. We start converting them into objectives, and those objectives are then finally configured into some kind of a model. And our initial model was something like this, where we came up with a bunch of fundamental objectives and a bunch of means objectives, which help us achieve our overall purpose of security. So this is what allowed us to organize our thought process around where a company should be going as far as security is concerned, what we should really be aspiring for. Our overall objectives took the form of maximizing awareness, human resource practices, ethical environment, integral business processes, management development processes and practices, ensuring data integrity, organizational integrity, privacy, individual ethics. So these are some of the objectives that came up in our study. And then there are a number of supporting objectives, which are termed as means objectives. These are really the alternatives which help us to achieve our fundamental objectives. So you might have work situation, an understanding of work situation and authority structures, which will help us in achieving our overall objective of maximizing IaaS security. So, so here are the bunch of things, but we did not stop here, because obviously we had these 25 odd means and fundamental objectives, and they become a little too much and overwhelming for any company to come to terms with. So we ended up ensuring that we need to have a more robust and a parsimonious set of objectives, which we could then use as means of measuring the level of security and guiding companies as to how they should be achieving their security. So we engaged in a number of statistical tests have a reduced number of sets which really loaded properly given our data, ultimately to achieve overall security and have high secure environments. So what we ended up having were a set of 4 fundamental objectives, which gravitate towards ensuring ethical values, ensuring identity, ensuring that there's a positive employee attitude, ensuring that there is security technology competence. So these 4 really come together for us to ensure high quality, high security environments. It is interesting to see how identity and positive employee attitudes come up, and we also felt that in our related work in other areas also showed us that organizational competence for secure environments is very, very important, and many companies do not have the competence to ensure security. And our fundamental objectives were obviously supported by a bunch of means objectives, and in our case, they were things like promoting awareness, honoring individuality, establishing censure, appreciating reciprocity, promoting openness, encouraging compliance, reducing apathy, clarifying accountability, developing mutual understanding. So these bunch of means objectives lead into the fundamental objectives and hence allow us to achieve the overall objective of ensuring security. Now, this can be an interesting tool. These objectives can be an interesting tool to engage in strategic planning, of course, as to how we should be planning for security. But it can also be a evaluation tool of sorts where we can go around and profile companies as to what level of security have they achieved, which we did. We started looking at our base data that we had, which is the line in black over here in this particular figure. And we profiled them and we said, you know what's your level of security, let's say, in instilling ethical values? How important do you think it is? And we kind of mapped it. Then we went into 2 other organizations, a cancer institute and a medical college, and we said, okay, now let's see how important you guys think achieving these objectives is. And obviously, you see different perceptions and different things as far as each of the objectives are concerned. Now, what does this tell us? It tells us that in certain environments, certain things are more important and in others they are not. So if they particularly match with our study sample, which is the line in black, then we are probably okay in terms of saying that this is, we really don't need to do anything. You're conforming to what the norms are. But as you see in the case of establishing censure, if you feel that there's a bit of a variation from a study sample, then you got to go and investigate this a little bit more and say, why is this the case? Why establishing censure has different readings as far as different environments is concerned. Our ultimate aim, of course, is to take this and kind of build a profiling model for a large sample so that we can actually give good insight as to why certain things work and why there are different perceptions as far as different security objectives are concerned. Overall, this is a nice little tool which you can use to engage in strategic planning and again to ensure that you are linking your security activities with the strategic objectives of a company and engaging in some kind of good strategic planning for security. We have looked at our objectives and then compared several other strategic efforts in security policy formulation and implementation around the world, and looked into the efficacy of those processes. And what we found was some daring gaps in how strategies have been formulated. On this particular slide, you will see a strategic security planning emphasis from the government of Qatar. They came up with 4 fundamental objectives that should guide their cybersecurity strategy for the nation. And these relate with critical infrastructure protection, responding and recovering, creating a legal and a regulatory environment, fostering a culture, and importantly, developing capability for responding and managing all sorts of cybersecurity threats. Now, if you think about it, any objective needs to be measurable. If you cannot assess how well you're doing on a certain thing, you cannot really engage in any kind of a strategic planning process, because you can't measure, you can't evaluate where you are today and where you will be going tomorrow. So, just simply stating that we need to protect the critical infrastructure protection, yes, an important objective, but that does not necessarily mean that you can measure how well you have protected your critical infrastructure, or responding and recovering for that matter. You really can't say that all I'm going to do is respond and recover from any kind of a hack that takes place. That does not tell us much. What exactly are you going to do? What kind of management practices and governance structures are you going to create, and how are you going to measure them? Those are the things that such strategic planning initiatives do not necessarily look at. Yes, we need compliance and regulatory environments around which we need to be operating, but they are again not measurable. How are you going to be doing it? So, end of the day, you end up just creating a very reactive security strategy, which is responding to when a threat arises, rather than proactively looking at initiatives that you need to put in place. The only two things that hark back at me when I looked at the government of Qatar's cybersecurity initiative is fostering a culture. Now, that is a very important one, because today, if you have not been able to foster a culture of a secure environment in a company, in a nation, then the battle has been lost, because ensuring cultures, developing and sustaining it, cybersecurity culture is a very, very important aspect of any strategic initiative, as is developing capabilities. If you do not have capabilities to recognize whether a security threat is imminent or is progressing, you will not be able to respond. So, capabilities and culture are perhaps two important aspects. And if you compare this with our very generic set of security objectives that we created, you can pretty much see that they got 2 out of 5 right, and other things are not measurable and hence do not necessarily help us ensure that good security can be built into an enterprise. In our work, we also evaluated other countries for their cybersecurity strategies. In this particular case, we looked at Great Britain. This particular slide depicts the overall strategy, cybersecurity strategy that UK has. And there are 4 fundamental objectives in this particular strategy. They talk about generally the United Kingdom being a very secure environment for conducting businesses, a very resilient environment, an open and a vibrant environment for cybersecurity. And then finally, they talk about cyber skills, knowledge, and capabilities that should be built in order to combat any cyber threat that exists. Again, if you compare their 4 fundamental objectives with what we are talking about in our research, you see a fair amount of discrepancy as to how those objectives are going to ensure any strategic planning. It is very, very important to have objectives which are measurable, because if you do not have measurable objectives, particularly in the case of cybersecurity, you do not know when you have achieved them and how I'm going to be able to evaluate these objectives. Hence, it becomes extremely important to lay a lot of emphasis on creating the right kind of objectives, because they are going to determine, end of the day, how secure you are and how well you are ensuring security to your citizenry or to your company, and hence engage in positive experiences for cybersecurity. Remember, cybersecurity is always an enabler of good business. If you have denial of service attacks, if your critical infrastructures are threatened, you will not be able to conduct business as normal. So it becomes a very important aspect to think about when you are engaging in any strategic planning aspect, as to what are those fundamental objectives and how am I going to support those fundamental objectives using various means and alternatives that there might be. So our work has provided a template of sorts, which can be customized for different environments, of course. It's a template of sorts which ensures focus, It allows companies and corporations to identify particular areas where they might be weak, and if they profile themselves over a longer period of time, you can actually benchmark yourself against your competition, against people in the same industry, and say where you are and where you aspire to go as far as cybersecurity is concerned.